Welcome to Quiet Car Stories. Tonight we'll be exploring the long and fascinating history of BMW, from its origins in the early days of aviation, through world wars, economic uncertainty, motorcycles, luxury cars, racing victories, and engineering innovations. BMW has become one of the most recognizable automotive names in the world. But the company we know today did not begin as a car manufacturer. Its story is far older than many people realize, and like many of the most enduring automotive brands, its history is shaped as much by survival and adaptation as it is by engineering. Before we begin, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What was the first BMW you remember seeing, riding in, or driving? Perhaps it was a classic 2002, an E30, an E39, an M3, or something more modern. Every enthusiast seems to have a BMW memory somewhere in their story. And if you enjoy these slow automotive documentaries, please consider liking the video and subscribing to Quiet Car Stories for future episodes. Now, get comfortable, settle in, and let's begin. The story of BMW begins before automobiles became the company's defining product. To understand BMW, we must first travel back to the early years of the 20th century. The world was changing rapidly. Aviation was still in its infancy. The internal combustion engine was evolving at an extraordinary pace, and Europe was entering an age of industrial innovation unlike anything seen before. In Germany, several small companies were experimenting with engine design. One of these businesses was founded by Karl Rapp in Munich in 1913. Known as BMW Motoren Werke, the company specialized in producing aircraft engines. At the time, aviation represented one of the most exciting technological frontiers in the world. Aircraft were becoming more capable every year, and reliable engines were absolutely essential. Early aviation demanded power plants that were lightweight, dependable, and capable of sustained operation under challenging conditions. This was no easy engineering task. Engine reliability in the early 20th century was still developing. Manufacturing techniques were less advanced than today. Materials technology was limited. Every improvement represented a significant achievement. Rapp's company became involved in supplying engines to aircraft manufacturers. But internal challenges and performance concerns eventually led to major organizational changes. In 1917, the company was restructured. A new name emerged, Bayerische Motoren Werke, the Bavarian Motor Works, BMW, the name by which the company would eventually become known around the world. At this stage, BMW was not producing cars. It was producing aircraft engines, and aircraft engines remained at the center of the company's identity during its earliest years. One of the most important early figures in BMW's history was engineer Max Friz. Friz designed a six-cylinder aircraft engine that would help establish BMW's engineering reputation. The engine performed exceptionally well for its time. It demonstrated reliability, efficiency, and technical sophistication that attracted attention throughout the aviation industry. These early successes helped BMW build an identity that would remain important throughout its future development, an emphasis on engineering excellence, precision, performance, and technical innovation. Even today, more than a century later, those themes remain central to BMW's image. The First World War created enormous demand for aircraft engines. BMW expanded during this period as military aviation became increasingly important. However, when the war ended in 1918, circumstances changed dramatically. Germany faced severe restrictions under the Treaty of Versailles. Aircraft engine production became heavily limited. For a company whose primary business centered on aviation engines, this presented a serious challenge. BMW needed to adapt. An adaptation would become a recurring theme throughout its history. Unable to continue aircraft engine production at previous levels, BMW began exploring alternative products. The company manufactured industrial equipment, agricultural machinery components, and various engineering products. But another opportunity soon emerged: motorcycles. In the early 1920s, motorcycles represented an increasingly important form of personal transportation. They were relatively affordable, practical, and suitable for a rapidly changing Europe. BMW entered this market in 1923 with the introduction of the BMW R32. The R32 would become one of the most important vehicles in the company's history, not because of sales volume alone, but because it established several engineering principles that continue to influence BMW motorcycles today. The R32 used a horizontally opposed twin-cylinder engine, often known as a boxer engine. Its cylinders extended outward on opposite sides of the motorcycle. This layout provided effective cooling and excellent balance. Power was transmitted through a shaft drive rather than a chain, a relatively unusual choice at the time. The motorcycle proved successful, reliable, technically innovative, and distinctly different from many competitors. The R32 helped establish BMW's reputation as a company willing to pursue engineering solutions that prioritized refinement and technical sophistication. Motorcycle racing further strengthened this reputation. BMW motorcycles achieved success in competition throughout the 1920s and 1930s. Racing provided valuable publicity, but it also served as an engineering laboratory. Lessons learned under competitive conditions often influence future production models. This connection between motorsport and engineering development would become another recurring theme throughout BMW's history. While motorcycles provided an important foundation, the automotive industry was growing rapidly. And eventually, BMW entered the car market. The company's first automobile arrived in 1928, following the acquisition of Fahrzeugfabrik Eisenach. This factory had been producing a small car known as the Dixie. The Dixie was built under license from the Austin 7, a British design that had achieved considerable success. BMW continued production of the vehicle, introducing it as the BMW 315. Although modest by modern standards, the car represented an important milestone. BMW had officially become an automobile manufacturer. The company now produced motorcycles and cars, and over time, cars would become increasingly important. The automotive market of the late 1920s and early 1930s was highly competitive. Manufacturers across Europe were experimenting with new technologies and vehicle concepts. BMW gradually expanded its offerings. Larger engines, more advanced chassis designs, improved performance. The company sought to distinguish itself through engineering quality rather than sheer production volume. This approach helped shape BMW's emerging identity. Throughout the 1930s, BMW introduced a range of increasingly sophisticated vehicles. Among the most significant was the BMW 328. Introduced in 1936, the 328 became one of the defining sports cars of its era. Lightweight, elegant, and remarkably capable. The 328 achieved considerable success in motorsport. Its performance demonstrated BMW's growing expertise in engine development and chassis engineering. Even today, the BMW 328 is often regarded as one of the most important vehicles in the company's history. Not because it sold in huge numbers, but because it helped establish BMW's reputation for combining performance with engineering sophistication. The 328 represented an early expression of themes that would later define many BMW automobiles: balanced handling, responsive engines, driver-focused design. These ideas would become central to the company's identity. Yet, as the 1930s progressed, Europe moved toward another devastating conflict. The Second World War would transform the automotive industry once again, and BMW's future would be affected profoundly. Like many German manufacturers, BMW became heavily involved in wartime production. Aircraft engines once again became a major focus. Factories shifted toward military requirements. Resources were directed toward the war effort. By the end of the conflict, much of Germany's industrial infrastructure had been damaged or destroyed. BMW faced enormous challenges. Production facilities were heavily impacted. The Eisenach factory found itself located within Soviet-controlled territory. Manufacturing operations were disrupted. And once again, the company faced uncertainty about its future. For a period after the war, BMW was unable to produce automobiles at all. Instead, survival depended on producing household goods, kitchen equipment, bicycles, and other practical items. The company that would eventually become a global luxury automotive manufacturer was, for a time, simply trying to survive. Those post-war years were difficult. Resources were scarce. Germany itself was rebuilding, and the future of many industrial companies remained uncertain. Yet BMW persisted, slowly, patiently, and over time the company began rebuilding its automotive ambitions. The first post-war BMW motorcycle appeared in 1948. The R24 marked a return to vehicle production and helped generate desperately needed revenue. Motorcycles once again provided stability during a period of recovery. Automobile production resumed later. The BMW 501, introduced in 1952, represented an ambitious attempt to re-enter the luxury car market. Elegant and technically advanced, it demonstrated BMW's determination to rebuild its reputation. However, the car was expensive to manufacture. Sales remained limited, and financial difficulties continued. By the late 1950s, BMW's future remained uncertain. The company faced significant economic challenges. Some observers believed it might not survive independently. At one stage, a proposed takeover by Mercedes-Benz appeared possible, yet events would take a different course, and that turning point would ultimately shape the modern BMW we recognize today. By the late 1950s, BMW found itself in one of the most uncertain periods in its history. The company had survived war, economic hardship, and the enormous challenge of rebuilding in post-war Germany. Yet survival alone was not enough. A business could continue operating for a time while still facing an uncertain future, and by the end of the decade, BMW was struggling to find its place in a rapidly changing automotive market. The problem was not a lack of engineering talent, nor was it a lack of ambition. In many ways, BMW's difficulties stemmed from being caught between two very different parts of the market. At one end were small, inexpensive cars. Across Europe, demand for affordable transportation remained strong. Families rebuilding their lives after the war often wanted practical, economical vehicles. Manufacturers such as Volkswagen were finding enormous success in this area. The Volkswagen Beetle had become increasingly popular, offering reliable transportation at a price many buyers could afford. At the other end of the market were luxury vehicles. These cars offered comfort, prestige, and advanced engineering, but they appealed to a much smaller group of customers. BMW attempted to operate in both worlds simultaneously. The company produced motorcycles, microcars, and luxury saloons. Yet neither approach was generating the level of financial stability the company desperately needed. One of BMW's most unusual vehicles during this period was the Isetta. The Isetta was not originally a BMW design. It had been developed by the Italian company ISO and was later produced under license by BMW. Small, compact, and highly distinctive, it featured a front opening door and seating for two occupants. In many ways, it was perfectly suited to the economic conditions of post-war Europe. Fuel-efficient, affordable, simple, the Isetta sold reasonably well and helped provide much-needed revenue. Yet despite its popularity, the small microcar could not transform BMW's long-term fortunes. Profit margins remained limited, and while the Isetta kept the company moving forward, it could not establish BMW as a major automotive force. At the same time, BMW's larger luxury cars faced different challenges. The BMW 501 and its successor models were beautifully engineered vehicles. They offered refinement, comfort, and quality craftsmanship, but they were expensive to produce and costly to purchase. Sales remained relatively modest. The company found itself investing heavily in vehicles that generated limited financial return. As the decade progressed, BMW's financial situation became increasingly fragile. Losses accumulated. Cash reserves became strained. The company appeared vulnerable. By 1959, the situation had become serious enough that a takeover proposal emerged from Daimler-Benz, the parent company of Mercedes-Benz. For many observers, the proposal seemed logical. Mercedes-Benz was financially stronger. BMW was struggling. A merger or acquisition could potentially stabilize the situation. Yet, not everyone agreed. Many shareholders, employees, and dealers opposed the proposal. They believed BMW should remain independent. Among those who shared this view was industrialist Herbert Quandt. The Quandt family would become enormously important to BMW's future. Herbert Quandt recognized that despite its financial difficulties, BMW possessed valuable engineering expertise, a respected brand identity, and significant potential. Rather than allowing the company to disappear into a larger competitor, he chose to invest heavily in its future. His support helped prevent the takeover from proceeding. Looking back, it is difficult to overstate the importance of this moment. Had events unfolded differently, BMW, as we know it today, might never have existed. Instead, the company remained independent, but independence alone did not solve its problems. BMW still needed a strategy. It needed products that could attract buyers, and most importantly, it needed a clear identity. The answer arrived in the early 1960s, and it arrived in the form of a new generation of cars that would fundamentally redefine the company. These vehicles became known as the Neue Klasse, the new class. The name itself reflected what BMW was attempting to achieve, not simply a new model, a new direction, a new beginning. Introduced in 1961, the BMW 1500 represented the first member of this new family. At first glance, it appeared relatively straightforward, a four-door saloon with clean modern styling. But beneath the surface, it represented a carefully considered vision for BMW's future. The company had realized that it could not compete effectively at the extremes of the market. Small microcars offered limited profitability. Large luxury cars appealed to relatively few customers. Instead, BMW identified an opportunity in the middle, a market for sporting, premium family cars. Vehicles that combined practicality with engaging driving characteristics, comfort with performance, everyday usability with engineering sophistication. This idea would eventually become one of BMW's defining strengths. The Neue Klasse introduced many features that would shape the company for decades to come. The cars featured independent suspension, modern styling, responsive handling, and perhaps most importantly, a new family of engines. Known as the M10 engine, this four-cylinder design became one of the most significant engines in BMW history. Introduced in the early 1960s, the M10 would remain in production in various forms for decades. Its influence extended far beyond its original application. Reliable, adaptable, and capable of impressive performance, it provided the foundation for many future BMW developments. The success of the Neue Klasse transformed the company's fortunes. Sales increased, financial stability improved. Customers responded positively to the idea of a car that offered both practicality and driving enjoyment. This balance would become a recurring theme throughout BMW's future. The company was no longer simply building transportation. It was building cars for people who enjoyed driving. This distinction became increasingly important. As the 1960s progressed, BMW expanded the Neue Klasse range. Additional models appeared. Engine options increased. The company's reputation continued growing. And alongside these practical family saloons, BMW began developing vehicles that would further strengthen its sporting image. One of the most important was the BMW 2002. Introduced in 1968, the 2002 would become one of the defining cars of BMW's history. Compact, lightweight, and surprisingly quick for its time. The 2002 embodied many of the qualities that enthusiasts still associate with BMW today. Responsive steering, balanced handling, a willingness to encourage driver involvement. The car proved particularly popular in export markets, including the United States. Many enthusiasts encountered BMW for the first time through the 2002, and for countless owners, it represented a revelation. Here was a practical car that was genuinely enjoyable to drive, a family car that behaved like a sports car, a concept that seems familiar today, but was far less common at the time. The success of the 2002 helped establish BMW's reputation internationally. It also reinforced the company's emerging identity. BMW was becoming known for building drivers' cars, vehicles that prioritized balance, precision, and engagement rather than simply transportation. This reputation would become one of the most valuable assets the company possessed. Throughout the late 1960s and into the 1970s, BMW continued refining this formula. The company expanded its product range, while maintaining a focus on engineering and driving dynamics. It was during this period that several model lines familiar today began to emerge. The foundations of the 3 Series, the 5 Series, the larger executive saloons that would define BMW's future. The company was evolving from a recovering post-war manufacturer into a confident global automotive brand. And yet, some of the most significant chapters of BMW's history were still ahead, because during the 1970s, another idea would begin taking shape. An idea that would eventually produce some of the most celebrated performance cars in automotive history, the creation of BMW Motorsport, and with it, the birth of a single letter that enthusiasts around the world would come to recognize instantly, the letter M. The creation of BMW Motorsport marked another defining moment in the company's history. By the early 1970s, BMW had successfully rebuilt itself through the Neue Klasse and the growing success of the 2002 and larger saloon ranges. The company was financially stronger, its reputation was improving internationally, and its identity as a manufacturer of driver-focused vehicles was becoming increasingly clear. Yet BMW wanted to go further. The company recognized that motorsport offered more than publicity alone. Racing provided a testing ground, a place where engineering ideas could be developed under extreme conditions, a place where weaknesses were exposed quickly, and perhaps most importantly, a place where a manufacturer could demonstrate what its engineers were truly capable of achieving. In 1972, BMW formally established BMW Motorsport GmbH. Initially, the division was relatively small. Its purpose was to support the company's racing activities and develop high-performance versions of BMW vehicles. Few people at the time could have predicted how influential the division would eventually become. Today, the letter M is recognized around the world. But in the beginning, BMW Motorsport was simply a group of engineers focused on extracting the maximum performance from BMW's existing strengths. The timing was ideal. Motorsport was enjoying enormous popularity during the 1970s. Touring car racing, endurance racing, and international championships attracted significant attention. Manufacturers increasingly viewed racing as an opportunity to demonstrate engineering excellence. BMW entered this environment with enthusiasm. The company's cars proved particularly well suited to touring car competition, balanced handling, responsive engines, strong chassis design. These qualities translated naturally to the racetrack. Success followed, and with success came confidence. One of the first major projects developed by BMW Motorsport was the BMW 3.0 CSL. Today, the car has achieved legendary status among enthusiasts, but its origins were surprisingly practical. The letters CSL stood for Coupe Sport Leichtbau, Sport Coupe Lightweight. The goal was straightforward: reduce weight, improve performance, increase competitiveness in touring car racing. Engineers removed unnecessary mass wherever possible. Aluminum panels were used in certain areas. Thinner steel reduced weight further. Sound insulation was minimized. The result was a vehicle that remained recognizably a BMW coupe, but possessed significantly improved performance characteristics. The car became famous not only for its engineering but also for its appearance. Large aerodynamic additions eventually appeared on racing versions, including substantial wings and spoilers. These modifications earned the car an affectionate nickname, the Batmobile. It was a dramatic machine, purposeful, distinctive, and extremely successful in competition. The 3.0 CSL helped establish BMW's motorsport credentials internationally. It demonstrated that BMW could compete successfully against established rivals, and it reinforced the idea that performance was becoming an increasingly important part of the company's identity. Yet perhaps the most important contribution of BMW Motorsport during this period was not a racing car. It was the gradual transfer of motorsport knowledge into road cars. The lessons learned on racetracks began influencing production vehicles more directly. Engine development improved. Suspension tuning became more sophisticated. Braking systems evolved. BMW's road cars increasingly reflected the engineering priorities of a company deeply involved in competition. This philosophy would eventually lead to one of the most famous performance cars ever produced, the the BMW M1. Introduced in the late 1970s, the M1 occupied a very different position from traditional BMW products. Until this point, most BMW performance vehicles had remained closely connected to practical road cars. The M1 was different. It was a mid-engine supercar, low, wide, exotic, designed with motorsport in mind from the beginning. The project emerged from BMW's desire to compete at the highest levels of international racing. To satisfy homologation requirements, a road-going version needed to be produced. The resulting car became one of the most distinctive vehicles in BMW history. The M1 featured a six-cylinder engine developed by Paul Roche, one of the most influential engineers in BMW's history. Roche's contributions to BMW performance engineering cannot be overstated. His work would influence everything from road cars to Formula One engines. The M1's engine produced impressive performance for its era, while maintaining the smoothness and refinement associated with BMW's straight-six designs. Although the M1 was produced in relatively small numbers, its significance extended far beyond sales figures. It established the M division as something more than a racing department. It demonstrated that BMW could create high-performance vehicles capable of competing with some of the most respected sports cars in the world, and it introduced a philosophy that would shape future M cars. Performance should be usable, accessible, integrated into the driving experience rather than existing solely as a headline number. During this same period, BMW continued refining its mainstream product range. The first-generation 3 Series, introduced in 1975, became enormously important. Replacing the 2002, the E21 3 Series carried forward many of the same ideas while modernizing the package: compact dimensions, rear-wheel drive, balanced handling, strong driver engagement. The formula proved successful. Customers appreciated the combination of practicality and driving enjoyment. The 3 Series quickly became one of BMW's defining products, and over the decades that followed, it would grow into one of the most influential compact executive cars ever produced. The larger 5 Series also continued evolving, providing greater comfort and space while maintaining the company's emphasis on driver involvement. This balance became increasingly central to BMW's appeal. Many manufacturers could build comfortable cars. Many manufacturers could build fast cars. BMW focused on creating cars that felt rewarding to drive every day. This distinction became one of the company's most valuable strengths. As the 1980s approached, BMW found itself in a very different position from the company that had struggled for survival 2 decades earlier. Sales were growing. Its global reputation was strengthening. Motorsport success was attracting attention, and the foundations of its modern product range were firmly established. The next decade would see BMW expand dramatically. New technologies would emerge. The M division would produce some of its most famous creations, and one particular car would arrive that many enthusiasts still regard as the definitive expression of BMW's philosophy: the original BMW M3. A vehicle that would become one of the most celebrated performance cars in automotive history. But before the M3 could appear, BMW first needed to navigate a rapidly changing automotive world, a world increasingly shaped by electronics, global competition, and rising expectations from customers around the globe. The 1980s would test BMW's ability to evolve once again. And as history had already shown many times, adaptation would prove just as important as engineering excellence. As the 1980s began, BMW entered a period of remarkable growth and transformation. The company had spent much of the previous 2 decades establishing its identity. The lessons of the Neue Klasse had created a clear direction. Motorsport activities had strengthened the brand's performance credentials. The 3 Series and 5 Series were becoming increasingly successful. BMW was no longer fighting for survival. Instead, it was becoming ambitious. The automotive world of the 1980s was changing rapidly. Electronics were beginning to appear in areas previously dominated by purely mechanical systems. Fuel injection was gradually replacing carburetors. Engine management systems were becoming more sophisticated. Safety requirements were increasing. Customers expected greater refinement, comfort, and reliability. For BMW, the challenge was maintaining its driver-focused character while embracing these new technologies. The company approached this challenge carefully. Rather than abandoning its traditional strengths, BMW used new technology to enhance them. One of the most significant developments during this period was the arrival of the second-generation 3 Series, known internally as the E30. Introduced in 1982, the E30 would eventually become one of the most beloved BMWs ever produced. At first glance, it appeared to be a natural evolution of the original 3 Series. The styling was clean and restrained. The proportions remained compact. The familiar BMW kidney grille and twin headlight arrangement were retained. Yet beneath the surface, the car represented substantial progress. Refinement improved, build quality increased, aerodynamics became more sophisticated. The suspension was carefully developed to maintain the responsive handling BMW customers expected. The E30 arrived at exactly the right moment. Throughout the 1980s, demand for premium compact cars continued growing. Customers wanted vehicles that offered prestige and driving enjoyment without the size or expense of larger luxury cars. The E30 delivered precisely that. It became successful across a wide range of markets and applications: practical family transport, executive commuting, long-distance touring, weekend driving enjoyment. The car seemed capable of doing almost everything well, and because of this versatility, it attracted an unusually broad audience. Yet for enthusiasts, one version of the E30 would become particularly significant: the BMW M3. The origins of the M3 were rooted in motorsport. During the mid-1980s, touring car racing remained highly competitive. Manufacturers needed homologation specials, road-going versions of competition cars, to satisfy racing regulations. BMW Motorsport saw an opportunity. Using the E30 as a foundation, engineers developed a highly specialized performance variant designed with racing success in mind. The resulting car looked familiar to casual observers, but was substantially different beneath the surface. Wider bodywork improved aerodynamics and accommodated larger wheels. Suspension geometry was revised. The engine was entirely unique. Rather than using BMW's traditional 6-cylinder layout, engineers chose a highly developed 4-cylinder engine. The decision was practical. The lighter engine improved weight distribution and handling while providing strong performance. Introduced in 1986, the E30 M3 quickly proved itself on both road and track. In competition, it became one of the most successful touring cars ever built. Race victories accumulated across Europe, Australia, and other international championships. The car demonstrated extraordinary versatility, fast enough for competition, refined enough for everyday road use. This combination became one of the defining characteristics of BMW's M division. Performance was important, but usability mattered too. The best M cars could excel on a race circuit while remaining perfectly comfortable on the journey home. As the M3 established itself, BMW's broader model range continued expanding. The 5 Series evolved into increasingly refined executive saloons. Larger 6-cylinder engines became central to the company's identity. In particular, BMW's straight-six engines developed an almost legendary reputation. There is something inherently smooth about the inline-six configuration. The engine's geometry allows for excellent balance and refinement. Vibrations are naturally minimized. Power delivery feels linear and progressive. BMW became one of the strongest advocates of the straight-six layout. Over time, the company's 6-cylinder engines became closely associated with the BMW driving experience itself. Drivers appreciated their smoothness, their willingness to rev, their distinctive sound, and their combination of performance and refinement. Throughout the 1980s, these engines appeared in numerous BMW models, helping strengthen the company's reputation for engineering excellence. The decade also saw BMW expand further into luxury markets. The introduction of the 7 Series provided a flagship model capable of competing with established luxury manufacturers. The first-generation 7 Series had appeared in 1977, but the concept matured significantly during the 1980s. Here was a car designed to demonstrate BMW's technological capabilities at the highest level: advanced electronics, sophisticated suspension systems, powerful engines, premium materials. Yet, even in its largest luxury vehicles, BMW maintained an emphasis on driving dynamics. The company consistently resisted becoming purely comfort-focused. A BMW, regardless of size, was expected to remain engaging behind the wheel. This philosophy distinguished the brand from many competitors. As electronics became increasingly important during the 1980s, BMW embraced them carefully. Engine management systems improved fuel efficiency and emissions performance. Anti-lock braking systems began appearing on more models. Onboard computers provided drivers with additional information. These technologies enhanced capability without fundamentally changing the character of the cars. The company's engineers seemed determined to preserve the connection between driver and machine. This balance proved successful. By the end of the decade, BMW had become one of the world's most respected premium automotive brands. Sales were strong. Its reputation for engineering excellence was well established. The M division had become a recognized performance icon, and the 3 Series was emerging as one of the defining cars of its segment. Yet, the automotive world was about to enter another period of significant change. The 1990s would bring new challenges. Globalization accelerated. Competition intensified. Environmental concerns grew increasingly important. Electronics became more powerful. Customer expectations continued rising. BMW would respond with some of the most celebrated vehicles in its history, cars that many enthusiasts still regard as the high point of the brand. The E36 and E46 generations of the 3 Series, the E39 5 Series, the V12-powered 750i, and a growing range of M cars that push performance to new levels while preserving everyday usability. For many BMW enthusiasts, the 1990s would become a golden era, a period where traditional BMW values combined with modern technology in a way that felt particularly balanced, and it would help define how the company was perceived for decades to come. For many BMW enthusiasts, the 1990s would come to represent something of a golden age. This is not simply nostalgia speaking. Every generation tends to look back fondly on the cars that were new during its formative years. Yet, there are practical reasons why the BMWs of the 1990s continue to attract admiration decades later. The company had reached a point where it possessed significant engineering resources, a strong financial position, and a clear understanding of its identity. Technology was advancing rapidly. Electronics were becoming more capable. Manufacturing quality was improving. Computer-aided design was increasingly sophisticated. And yet the automobile itself had not become completely dominated by digital systems. Many of the cars from this era retained a distinctly mechanical character. Steering remained communicative. Engine response felt direct. Driver involvement remained central to the experience. For BMW, this balance between modern capability and traditional driving engagement proved particularly successful. The decade began with the arrival of a new generation of products. Among the most important was the E36 3 Series, introduced in 1990. Replacing the hugely successful E30 was no easy task. The E30 had become deeply respected among enthusiasts and everyday drivers alike. It had established the modern 3 Series formula and helped strengthen BMW's global reputation. The E36 needed to move the company forward without abandoning what had made its predecessor successful. BMW's engineers approached the challenge carefully. The new car was larger, more aerodynamic, more refined. The suspension design became significantly more sophisticated, improving both ride quality and handling stability. Safety features advanced considerably. Interior comfort increased. And yet, despite these changes, the car remained recognizably a BMW. The emphasis on balanced handling remained. Rear-wheel drive continued. The engine range offered a variety of options, including the smooth inline-six engines that had become one of BMW's defining strengths. The E36 quickly found success around the world. It appealed to a broad range of customers: young professionals, families, driving enthusiasts, business users. Its versatility became one of its greatest strengths. BMW had become exceptionally skilled at building cars that could perform many roles simultaneously: practical transport during the week, enjoyable driving on weekends, comfortable long-distance touring. The E36 managed all of these tasks with remarkable competence. Then came the M3. The E36 M3 followed the hugely successful E30 M3, but its philosophy differed somewhat from its predecessor. The original M3 had been created primarily for homologation purposes. The E36 M3 was designed more directly as a high-performance road car. Power increased significantly, refinement improved. The car became faster, smoother, and more versatile. Its straight-six engine delivered strong performance while maintaining the characteristic smoothness that BMW enthusiasts appreciated. Many owners discovered that the car could serve equally well as an everyday vehicle or a serious performance machine. This dual personality became one of the defining characteristics of BMW's M division throughout the decade. As the 1990s progressed, BMW continued refining its broader product range. The 5 Series in particular achieved extraordinary success. Introduced in 1995, the E39 5 Series is frequently cited as one of the greatest executive saloons ever produced. Even today, decades after its introduction, many enthusiasts regard it as a benchmark. The reasons are numerous. The styling remains elegant and restrained. The build quality is exceptional. The chassis achieves a remarkable balance between comfort and handling. And the engine range offered something for almost every type of customer. From economical diesel engines to powerful V8s, the E39 demonstrated BMW's ability to combine engineering sophistication with everyday usability. The car arrived during a period when many manufacturers were experimenting with increasingly complex technologies. BMW certainly embraced innovation, but it often did so in a way that felt measured and purposeful. The E39 included modern electronics and safety systems, yet the underlying driving experience remained clear and intuitive. Steering feel remained excellent. Weight distribution was carefully considered. The car felt connected to the road in a way that many competitors struggled to match. Perhaps no version better demonstrated this philosophy than the E39 M5. Introduced in 1998, the M5 combined a spacious executive saloon body with a naturally aspirated V8 engine, producing substantial power. The concept itself was fascinating, a practical four-door family car capable of extraordinary performance. Yet despite its speed, the M5 never felt purely aggressive. It remained refined, comfortable, usable. The ability to combine these qualities became one of BMW's greatest strengths during this period. At the same time, the company continued expanding into other segments. The luxury-focused 7 Series evolved further. Coupe models gained increasing popularity. Diesel technology improved significantly. BMW's engineering teams worked continuously to improve efficiency, performance, and refinement. One area where BMW invested heavily was engine development. Throughout the 1990s, the company produced some of the most admired engines in its history. Its inline-six engines became particularly celebrated. Smooth, responsive, refined. The configuration itself suited BMW's engineering philosophy perfectly. Many competitors relied increasingly on V6 engines because of packaging advantages. BMW remained committed to the straight-six layout wherever possible. The result was a distinctive engine character that became closely associated with the brand. There was a certain smoothness to power delivery, a willingness to rev, a mechanical refinement that felt uniquely BMW. Owners often spoke about these engines with unusual affection, not simply because they were powerful, but because they felt special. They contributed to the overall character of the vehicle in ways that were difficult to measure on paper. The decade also saw BMW achieve significant success in motorsport, touring car championships, sports car racing, endurance events. The company's motorsport activities continued reinforcing its performance image, and increasingly lessons learned through competition influenced production vehicles. This connection between racing and road cars remained an important part of BMW's identity. By the late 1990s, BMW had become one of the most respected premium automotive manufacturers in the world. Its reputation extended well beyond Germany. North America had become a major market. The United Kingdom represented another important region. Sales expanded across Europe and Asia. The company had successfully transformed itself from a struggling post-war manufacturer into a global automotive powerhouse. Yet success brought new challenges. The automotive industry was entering the 21st century. Environmental regulations were becoming stricter. Consumer expectations were evolving. Digital technology was advancing rapidly, and new competitors were emerging from around the world. BMW would need to adapt once again. The 2000s would bring significant changes. Some would prove highly successful. Others would become controversial among enthusiasts. Design philosophy would evolve. Electronics would become increasingly important. The SUV market would grow dramatically, and BMW would face the difficult challenge of balancing tradition with innovation. It was a challenge that every historic manufacturer eventually encounters. How do you move forward without losing what made people care about the brand in the first place? For BMW, the answer would shape the next chapter of its history. As the automotive industry entered the 21st century, BMW found itself in a position that would have seemed almost unimaginable during the difficult years of the 1950s. The company was profitable. Its products were respected around the world. The 3 Series had become a benchmark in its segment. The M division was producing some of the most admired performance cars on the market, and BMW's reputation for engineering excellence remained strong. Yet success often creates its own challenges. Customers expect growth. Investors expect expansion. Markets evolve. Technologies change. And manufacturers must decide how much of their identity they are willing to preserve as they adapt to new realities. For BMW, the early 2000s became a period of transformation. One of the most visible changes arrived through design. For much of its history, BMW styling had evolved gradually, each new generation built carefully upon the previous one. Proportions changed, details evolved, but there was usually a clear visual connection between old and new models. That approach shifted dramatically under the leadership of design chief Chris Bangle. Beginning in the late 1990s and becoming increasingly visible during the early 2000s, BMW introduced a series of designs that generated strong reactions from both critics and enthusiasts. The E65-7 series, launched in 2001, became perhaps the most famous example. Its styling departed significantly from previous BMW luxury cars. Surfaces became more sculpted, proportions changed. The rear design attracted particular attention. Some observers admired the boldness. Others disliked the departure from tradition. Regardless of opinion, the design achieved something important. People talked about it. The car stood out. And over time, many of the ideas introduced during this period would influence automotive design more broadly. The debate surrounding BMW's styling reflected a larger question facing the company. How could it remain relevant in a rapidly changing world while preserving the qualities that had made it successful? The answer was not always straightforward. Technology was becoming increasingly important. Electronics now controlled more vehicle functions than ever before. Navigation systems appeared. Advanced driver information displays became common. Electronic stability control systems improved safety. Engine management systems grew more sophisticated. The modern automobile was becoming a rolling computer in ways that would have seemed extraordinary only a decade earlier. BMW embraced these technologies enthusiastically. The company believed innovation was essential to maintaining its position. And in many ways, this philosophy worked. The early 2000s saw continued sales growth. The 3 Series remained enormously popular. The 5 Series continued attracting executive buyers. The M division expanded its reputation. Yet another major change was occurring simultaneously, one that would reshape not only BMW, but the entire automotive industry: the rise of the sport utility vehicle. Historically, BMW had focused on cars, sports saloons, coupes, luxury sedans, touring models, but customer demand was shifting. Increasing numbers of buyers wanted vehicles that sat higher off the ground, offered greater practicality, and projected a more rugged image. BMW's response arrived in 1999 with the launch of the X5. At the time, some enthusiasts viewed the concept with skepticism. A BMW sport utility vehicle seemed almost contradictory. Could a company known for balanced handling and driver-focused engineering really build an SUV without compromising its identity? BMW believed it could. The X5 was marketed not as an SUV, but as a sports activity vehicle. The distinction reflected BMW's priorities. Rather than focusing solely on off-road capability, engineers concentrated on on-road dynamics. The goal was to create a larger, more practical vehicle that still felt recognizably like a BMW behind the wheel. The strategy proved remarkably successful. Customers responded positively. Sales were strong. And over time, the X5 became one of BMW's most important products. Additional models followed: the X3, the X6, the X1. Eventually, an entire family of BMW SUVs emerged. For better or worse, these vehicles transformed the company's business. Today, SUVs account for a substantial portion of BMW's global sales. Without them, the company's financial position would likely look very different. At the same time, BMW continued developing the products that had built its reputation. The E46 3 Series became one of the most admired BMWs ever produced. Introduced in 1998 and continuing through much of the early 2000s, it refined the formula established by previous generations. The styling was elegant, the handling remained balanced, build quality was excellent, and the engine range offered something for nearly every customer. Many enthusiasts still regard the E46 as one of the best examples of BMW's traditional philosophy. Modern enough to be practical, classic enough to feel mechanical, sophisticated without becoming overly complex, the E46 M3 became particularly celebrated. Powered by the naturally aspirated S54 inline-six engine, it delivered strong performance while maintaining the smoothness and responsiveness associated with BMW's best engines. Even decades later, the car remains highly sought after. It represents a period where technology and mechanical engagement seem particularly well balanced. The same could be said of several BMW products from this era. The company appeared confident in its identity, comfortable with its engineering philosophy, capable of embracing new technology without completely abandoning its roots. Yet as the decade progressed, broader changes within the automotive industry became increasingly difficult to ignore. Environmental concerns were growing, fuel economy regulations were becoming stricter, carbon emissions were receiving greater attention from governments around the world. Manufacturers began searching for ways to maintain performance while reducing fuel consumption. BMW responded through a variety of approaches. Engine efficiency improved, direct fuel injection became increasingly common, turbocharging returned to prominence. Historically, many BMW enthusiasts had associated the brand with naturally aspirated engines. The company's inline-six engines in particular were celebrated for their smooth power delivery and willingness to rev. But emissions regulations and fuel economy targets were becoming more demanding. Turbocharging offered a solution. Smaller engines could produce comparable performance while consuming less fuel under many driving conditions. Gradually, BMW's engine philosophy began evolving. The change was not unique to BMW. Manufacturers throughout the industry were making similar decisions. Yet for enthusiasts, it represented a significant shift. The sound changed, throttle response changed, engine character changed. The naturally aspirated era that had defined so many beloved BMWs was slowly drawing to a close. At the same time, diesel engines became increasingly important in Europe. BMW invested heavily in diesel technology during the 2000s. Its diesel engines developed strong reputations for refinement, efficiency, and performance. Long-distance drivers appreciated their economy. Business users valued their practicality. For a period, diesel became a major component of BMW's strategy. Then another technological revolution began gathering momentum: electrification. At first, the concept seemed distant. Electric vehicles remained relatively uncommon. Battery technology still faced limitations. Charging infrastructure was limited. Yet BMW recognized that change was coming. The company began investing in future technologies earlier than many observers expected. This effort eventually produced one of the most unusual vehicles in BMW's history, the BMW i3. Introduced in 2013, the i3 represented a radically different vision of what a BMW could be. Lightweight carbon fiber construction, an electric drivetrain, a futuristic interior, sustainable materials. The car looked unlike anything else in BMW's range. Some customers loved it, others found it unusual. But regardless of opinion, the i3 demonstrated BMW's willingness to experiment. It showed that the company was thinking seriously about the future, and that future would increasingly involve electrification. As the 2010s progressed, BMW continued balancing multiple priorities simultaneously, preserving its reputation for driving enjoyment, meeting increasingly strict environmental regulations, expanding globally, developing electric technology, maintaining profitability. It was a difficult balancing act, and one that continues today. Because the BMW of the 21st century faces challenges very different from those faced by the BMW of the 20th. The company that once worried about surviving financial collapse now operates in a world shaped by software, sustainability, autonomous driving research, and electrification. Yet despite these enormous changes, certain themes remain surprisingly familiar. Engineering remains central, performance still matters, and the idea of creating vehicles that are enjoyable to drive continues influencing BMW's decisions. The question now is what that philosophy will look like in the decades ahead, because the next chapter of BMW's history is still being written, and like every chapter before it, it will be shaped by the balance between tradition and innovation. As BMW moved deeper into the 2000s and into the early years of the 2020s, the company found itself navigating perhaps the most significant transformation since the arrival of the Neue Klasse more than half a century earlier. The automotive world was changing again, not gradually as it had during some previous eras, but rapidly. Governments around the world were introducing increasingly strict emissions regulations. Cities were beginning to consider restrictions on internal combustion vehicles. Advances in battery technology were making electric vehicles more practical. Consumer expectations were shifting. Software was becoming just as important as hardware, and every major manufacturer faced the same question. What does the future of the automobile look like? For BMW, the challenge was particularly complex. The company's identity had been built around engines. For decades, BMW had become known for smooth, inline-six engines, high-revving, naturally aspirated performance cars, balanced rear-wheel drive chassis, and an emphasis on driving enjoyment. These qualities had defined the brand for generations. But what happens when the engine itself becomes less important? What happens when the future increasingly involves electric motors rather than combustion? It was a question without an obvious answer. BMW's response was measured compared with some competitors. Rather than abandoning internal combustion immediately, the company pursued multiple paths simultaneously. Traditional petrol and diesel engines continued evolving. Hybrid systems expanded throughout the range. Fully electric vehicles received increasing investment. The strategy reflected uncertainty within the wider industry. No manufacturer could predict exactly how quickly customers would embrace electrification. No manufacturer knew precisely how infrastructure would develop. And so BMW attempted to remain flexible. This approach can be seen clearly in the modern BMW lineup. Some vehicles continue using highly sophisticated internal combustion engines. Others combine electric assistance through hybrid systems, and some rely entirely on electric power. The company effectively began operating in several automotive eras at once, 1 foot in the past, 1 foot in the future. Yet, throughout these changes, BMW continued emphasizing driving dynamics. Engineers often spoke about preserving what they called the BMW feeling. The challenge was determining what that feeling actually meant. For decades, enthusiasts might have described it through specific mechanical characteristics: the smoothness of an inline-six, the balance of rear-wheel drive, the sound of a naturally aspirated engine climbing through the rev range, the precise feel of hydraulic steering. But as technology evolved, many of these defining characteristics changed. Electric power steering replaced hydraulic systems. Turbocharging became widespread. Automatic transmissions became faster and more efficient than manual gearboxes in many situations. Electric vehicles introduced entirely different driving experiences. The company therefore had to think more deeply about what made a BMW feel like a BMW. Increasingly, the answer centered around broader qualities: responsiveness, balance, driver confidence, predictable handling, engineering precision. The exact methods used to achieve these qualities could change, but the objectives remained similar. This period also saw BMW revisit one of the most important names in its history, Neue Klasse, the same phrase that had helped rescue the company during the early 1960s. More than 60 years after the original Neue Klasse transformed BMW's fortunes, the company announced plans for an entirely new generation of vehicles using the same name. The decision was symbolic. The original Neue Klasse had represented reinvention, a fresh start, a new direction, and BMW clearly viewed the coming electric era in similar terms. Once again, the company found itself at a crossroads. Once again, it was preparing for a significant transformation. The reuse of the Neue Klasse name acknowledged this historical parallel. It suggested that BMW understood the scale of the challenge ahead, and perhaps also the opportunity, because throughout its history, BMW has repeatedly adapted to changing circumstances. It began as an aircraft engine manufacturer. It became a motorcycle company. It entered automobile production. It survived financial crisis. It rebuilt after war. It embraced motorsport. It expanded into luxury vehicles. It entered the SUV market. And now it was preparing for another major evolution. When viewed across more than a century, one of the most striking aspects of BMW's history is not any individual car or engine. It is the company's ability to change while preserving a sense of continuity. The BMW of 1917 would be almost unrecognizable to a modern observer. The products are different, the technologies are different, the markets are different, and yet certain themes appear again and again throughout the story: engineering, innovation, adaptation, a belief that technical excellence matters, and an emphasis on creating machines that people enjoy using. The specific expression of those ideas has evolved over time. The aircraft engines of the First World War expressed them one way. The motorcycles of the 1920s expressed them another. The Neue Klasse saloons of the 1960s expressed them differently still. And today's electric vehicles represent yet another chapter in that continuing evolution. Looking back over the company's history, it becomes clear that BMW's story is not simply about cars. It is about reinvention. Few manufacturers have experienced so many dramatic changes while maintaining a continuous identity. Many companies disappear entirely when faced with financial hardship or technological disruption. Others survive but lose the qualities that once made them distinctive. BMW has faced both risks repeatedly. The financial crisis of the late 1950s could easily have ended the company. The changing demands of the post-war market could have rendered it irrelevant. The rise of new technologies could have left it behind. Yet somehow, through a combination of engineering skill, fortunate decisions, and a willingness to adapt, the company continued moving forward. Of course, not every decision has been universally popular. Every generation of BMW enthusiasts has its own opinions. Some prefer the simplicity of the 2002. Others admire the balance of the E30. Many regard the E39 as a high point. Some miss naturally aspirated engines. Others embrace modern technology. This diversity of opinion is perhaps inevitable for a company with such a long history. Different eras appeal to different people. Different cars represent different values, and each generation leaves its own impression on those who experience it. Yet beneath these differences lies a shared thread. Whether discussing a motorcycle from the 1920s, a sports saloon from the 1960s, an M car from the 1980s, or an electric vehicle from the present day, the conversation almost always returns to engineering. How was it designed? Why does it feel the way it does? What solutions did the engineers choose? These questions have always been central to BMW's identity. And perhaps that is why the company continues to inspire such loyalty among enthusiasts. The cars themselves matter. but so does the thinking behind them, the sense that engineering decisions are being made deliberately rather than accidentally, that there is a philosophy connecting one generation to the next, even when the details change. And so, as we reach the end of this story, it is worth returning to where it began. Not with cars, but with engines. A small company in Munich building aircraft engines during the early 20th century. A business facing uncertainty and opportunity in equal measure. At that time, nobody could have predicted the future. Nobody could have known about the motorcycles, the sports saloons, the racing victories, the M division, the global expansion, or the electric vehicles that would follow. All of that still lay decades ahead. Yet the foundations were already there. A commitment to engineering, a willingness to innovate, a determination to adapt when circumstances demanded it. Those qualities carried BMW through war, economic hardship, changing technologies, and shifting markets, and they continue shaping the company today. The history of BMW is often told through individual cars. The 328, the 2002, the E30 M3, the E39 M5. The vehicles deserve their place in the story, but the larger story is perhaps even more interesting. It is the story of a company continually redefining itself, while trying to remain true to the principles that made it successful in the first place. A company that has spent more than a century balancing tradition and innovation, and a company whose next chapter is still being written. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the history of BMW. If you enjoyed this episode of Quiet Car Stories, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Perhaps you have a favorite BMW generation, a memorable road trip, or a particular model that first sparked your interest in cars. And if you'd like to hear more calm automotive stories, please consider subscribing to the channel. For now, though, wherever you are in the world, thank you for listening. And until next time, good night.